that brainstorming. My name is Rebecca Stone. I'm with Community Workshop and had a great time helping to design and facilitate these 5 forums. So I'm going to do just a very quick introduction to our plan tonight and then pass it over to Lori Hirschfield. We won't talk at you too long tonight, and we will break you up into small groups to really dig into some pretty big questions as we put together forum. By way of introduction, I just want to cover what we're hoping to get out of tonight and a little bit of framing for the beginning. So throughout this whole series, we've talked about a lot of different topics relevant to Hartford's future. Last week, we dug into land use and natural resources. We've talked about energy. We've talked about a variety of community services. Housing and economic development are really closely related. In some ways, I think it's fitting that this is the final one, because this is really at the core of what it takes to create a community where people want to live and work and that will thrive in the future. I think more than any other topic we've covered, this is one where it's pretty important to have a little grounding in some data as we start talking about approaches and strategies to create a vibrant and thriving economy into the future, to create the kinds of housing we need to support the community. So Lori's going to do an introduction to that in a few minutes, and we have people here to work with each of the small groups tonight and bring in a lot of expertise and knowledge about what's happening in this area of the field right now. What are the data and trends and conditions we need to be thinking about as we plan 20 years into the future? So when we break up, we will split into 4 groups again. We'll have one really focusing on housing, one focusing on creating vibrant village centers that can thrive. We know that whatever the future economy looks like, having strong core village centers is probably going to be an important part of it. We will have one talking about what we're calling the new economy, recognizing that whatever Hartford's economic future is, it's not going to look like what it is today or what it was 50 years ago. It's going to be something new. And the last one will focus on jobs and creating a strong workforce. That will also be for us. As Lori dives in, I'm going to be taking some quick brainstorming notes, and we'll ask you all to contribute to this as well. And I want to just start with a quick introduction to this. Actually, I had a high school English teacher who talked a lot about the decade zone, which I think is so relevant to planning. So there's what we know about the future, and it's actually a pretty small amount of stuff. There's what we don't know about the future economy and housing. That's pretty big. We know it's going to be different, but there's so much we don't know about how that's going to show up. And then you have the decay. That's what you don't even know you don't know. And that's enormous. So as we dive into it tonight, we want to ask you to keep those things in mind. We'll try to give you some grounding in what we know, but as you approach all these conversations, keep in mind what we don't know and how we need to plan for a future in which we don't know what's going to happen, or don't even know we don't know what's going to happen. So with that, I'll pass it to Lori.
So thanks for coming. So as Rebecca had indicated, we're going to spend a little bit of time just getting into some of the statistics. Now, I just took little snippets of different areas and things to get you to see a little bit more about it. But the one thing I will say from the research that I've done, what I've known, is that the interplay between housing and economic development are very, very close. In fact, they're so intertwined that sometimes it's hard to separate them out when you're trying to put together a presentation, because they do tend to run into each other so clearly. So, first of all, the one thing I want to just sort of point out a little bit is talk about what we know a little bit about what affordable housing is. So if you look over there onto the very far right, you'll see the column for Windsor County. So we're looking really at Vermont and Windsor County and talking a little bit about what is the gap that we have between what people can afford and what are the wages that they need in order to be able to do that. And statistically, what they have found in Vermont is that we have a group called the cost burden renters and then the severely cost burden renters. And the cost burden renters are those that 30% of their income, they're struggling to meet that 30%, not spending more than 30% of your income. And that's many of you may have heard that, that's a housing and urban development standard, that people should not be spending more than 30% of their income. Now remember, it's 30% of their gross income, not 30% of what they're taking home. So you can imagine that it truly is out of pocket more than that 30%, even when you're just calculating it in terms of what you're bringing home in your pocket. So we have here 58%, and I apologize for the resolution here, it's really just not coming up well. So we have 58% of those living in Windsor County are struggling, what they're calling cost burden. 30% of their income, they're going to be needing to spend more than that. And just to spend 30% is a burden. There are also 29% of the people in Windsor County that are spending 50% or more of their income in order to be able to have affordable housing, or whatever that may be. So what we're talking about here a little bit is that gap. And there's this program through a national and the Vermont Housing Affordability Association have been for the last few years of putting together information on statistics nationwide and then bringing that into the spectrum of what's going on in Vermont and how does it compare. So in terms of across the nation, you can see that for a 2-bedroom household, and this is as of 2018 statistics, you have a gap of $9.55 in terms of an hourly wage. That means that the number of people that are able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Windsor County, their average income that they're making does not support that. They are short $9.55 an hour in terms of that income. So just another little statistic. So we're going to boil down and see what that shows up a little bit. So they looked at it statewide and as a nation, what are the metropolitan areas and what they have there. And for us, the metropolitan area, if you're looking at it in terms of those, and we're in a neo-metropolitan area, you can see that we are 5th in the nation in terms of the highest cost, in terms of what wages you need in order to support a 2-bedroom unit. That's pretty significant. 5th in the nation. Now when you're looking at it a little bit more in terms of ranking it by states, we're still pretty high up there because you can see in Vermont, if you're looking at it from that perspective, it's $22.40. It ranks out that way when they look at it on a statewide basis as opposed to a micro non-urban area. So again, we're still up there, and that tells you something about Vermont. We struggle to have that affordability, and I can actually relate to it a little bit. I lived in the Washington, D.C. area before I moved here. I thought I'm going to come here and I'm going to be able to find really easy, affordable housing. But it's all the other factors that come into play, and rental was actually equal to what people were paying in the Washington, D.C. area when I left, and that was a few years back. But it tells you that you don't always get what you expect. I thought I was going to be in that much better. So now we're digging down a little bit more into what it looks like in terms of those statistics in in Vermont and in our region again. So what you can see here is, at the very beginning, we have, again, what is that wage that you need per hour in order to be able to support a 2-bedroom unit in our area? And that's $22.40. That's what it says in Vermont that you need to do that. And that translates into an apartment that is like $1,165 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. That's fair market rate. And we do have some, obviously, units that are subsidized either through a special program or that they're just at a lower rate because of the quality of the housing sometimes. But they're also calling this a modest 2-bedroom apartment. This is not luxury. This is just what we consider a 2-bedroom apartment. Now, that is the gap. So now you're starting to look at, and what is that gap? So if you're talking about for a 1-bedroom, that gap would be $17.84 is what you need to have. Now keep in mind, the minimum wage is $10.50. Now in Vermont, the average rental wage is a little bit higher, which is good. We have a little bit higher rental rate. That's $12.85. But still, that's not hitting the $22.40 mark, and that's not hitting the $17.84 for a 1-bedroom apartment mark. So what does that mean? Well, it translates into 85 hours. At a 40-hour week, you need to, if you were going for a 2-bedroom, you'd have to work 85 hours in that week in order to make enough money to do that. If you're looking at it for a single bedroom, you'd have to work 68 hours. Now, that does take into consideration that if you have 2 income earners in that, it may be more possible in the $85 range. But in many times, you're talking about if you have a 2-bedroom and you're a couple and you have a child, or you might be a single parent and you have 2 children, think about what it now means in terms of the affordability. How many people in the household can really work? So, and then you take that down and you talk about number of full-time jobs. That's 2.1 is the 85 hours, or 1.7 jobs that you would have to have. And we know that there are many people from studies that have been done that are working 2 jobs. Sometimes it's 1.5, sometimes it's 2 part-time jobs to make up those hours and what they need to do. And let's just keep in mind, when you're talking about that affordability, it's $46,000. Sometimes when you look at it, you say, oh, $22 an hour is a really, really good solid wage. And it is, in comparison to what the minimum wage is. But if you think about it in terms of the annual income being $46,000, and you know what you're making today, and you can imagine, you know, you may be on that limited income as many other people are, and how hard it is to make that 46 stretch. Or those of us who might be at a higher income, and we know how difficult it is to make that stretch just to meet the basics. So those are some of the things that we're facing here. And then I'd also like to point out Windsor County, one of the highest in the state, second one, 2065. So again, it's a little bit higher than the state average. So if you're living in this area, and we are in this little 4-corner area of Norwich, Hartford, Lebanon, and Hanover, we have one of the highest rents in all of the state, and that's why we get actually a special rate when we are calculated with the HUD median income standard. So again, that just kind of gives you a little bit of the context of what we have. And again, what does that translate into? A 1-bedroom apartment is $928 market rate. So yeah, I think we'll go on to the next one. So, so we're going to dive down a little bit more and look at this in terms of the national comparison here. And so that out of reach, again, that 2-bedroom housing wage is $22.10 on a national level. Hartford is, or our area here is $22.40. So again, we're higher than the national average. And the same thing with the 1-bedroom, we're just about at the same rate there. And so that can give you a little bit of a sense of what it is. But the other thing I want you to take a note of, and you may not be able to read this because it's a little bit difficult, but medical assistants, $15.91. They don't make enough money to live here. Laborers and material movers, $12.59. Home health aides, $12.55. You can see as it keeps going down there, these are people that are in our community. And when I was looking at some of the numbers there of the actual wages that we see across the board, there's a tremendous number of people that are part of our service community that make it possible for our daily lives to function well, that are not making a livable wage in order to be able to afford housing. So what they end up doing, if they are on fixed incomes, they tend to have to make choices every month of what they're going to do. Or in many, many situations, they're finding alternative housing situations, or they're finding substandard housing. So those are some of the things that we come across as we're looking at this. And then on top of that, we have a housing shortage. So even if someone can afford to do this, cobble it together and make it work, there isn't enough housing out there that has been constructed and is available. We have a 1.9% vacancy rate in our area right now. So, so it's a housing production as well. So here are some of the other pieces of, there you are, availability of vacancy rate is 1.9, and actually that goes between 2.2 and 1.9, kind of see that back and forth. That's kind of the range we're seeing right now. Windsor County is 5.1. Thank you, Andrew, for giving me some of these more statistics too. Median household income, you can see that information there. 1-bedroom, this was what, again, was in 2017, and as I mentioned, those numbers have gone up a little bit, so it's a little bit more expensive now from when these numbers were collected. So the 1-bedroom in Windsor County is now $928 a month instead of the $861 in 1 year. Windsor County, 2-bedroom, has gone up from $105.7 to $1165. 1 year. That's all we're seeing. Might be a year and a half depending on how some of these statistics are collected. That's what we're seeing. Percentage of cost burden renters, gone up again. In Hartford, we're estimating it's at 44%. And in Windsor County, it's 51%. That's more than half of your population. And percentage of severely cost burden, again, 21% to 23%. So again, we're right about that. We're right about there. And then just a little bit of a statistics of what we have. We're gathering a little bit more. But in Hartford, our housing production just last year was 103 units, and we know that there's probably another, of a similar nature that we've gotten there. But as you can see, it's really we're needing to step up the ability to create housing, and not only just affordable housing, but housing at all income levels. Vermont's minimum wage earners. Now this is beginning to start to have you look again at that interplay between your wages and a livable wage, and what can we do when we start looking into this whole dynamic of what is our economic future, and how can we make it sustainable for the people that want to continue to live in Vermont and the people that we want to bring to Vermont. And we know one of the biggest challenges that we have in our economic development these days is the fact that we don't have adequate housing for businesses to relocate here, for businesses to expand. It's one of the major things we hear over and over and over again in terms of it. So our job going into the future is going to be a little bit challenging in making sure that we answer those, we address those opportunities. And we have to look at them as opportunities, because if we have many different ways to slice it. And that's what is before us now, is to really start to jump into what we don't know that we don't know, maybe a little bit more. So you can see, now we have our aging population. And how is that affecting our affordability and wages? We have half are older for 35, our average age of minimum income earner who's making minimum wage is 35 years. That's pretty high, because you typically think, oh, minimum wage, it's a high school student, maybe somebody who's in college, they're making the minimum wage. That's not the case, it's actually 35. Half are older than 30, and a third are more than 40 years old. 7 out of 10 of the jobs projected to occur in the next 10 years will still be below the affordability today that we know in order to have a 2-bedroom apartment and a 1-bedroom apartment. So that's lower than the 1-bedroom housing wage of 1784. 30% of the residents will be of an age of 65 or older by 2030. We are an aging population. And we know that people, as they get into more of their senior years, many of them either are, or we may be part of that future, that they are on fixed incomes. And with the fixed incomes, you know that there are more and more challenges. And right now, statistically, the population for renters do not have enough for a modest 2-bedroom apartment. So if we're talking about a significant number of our aging population will be increasing, the affordability of housing is going to be significantly challenging for them. And right now, the numbers I'm hearing are that most of them will not be able to have housing unless they have some alternative way of providing that housing than what we typically think of going out and getting an apartment or an older home and being able to maintain. So those are, again, some of the things that we need to keep in mind. Now we're starting to look a little bit more into what is our employment situation here, some of the stats on that. Unemployment seasonal rate adjusted, we're pretty low. We tend to be low here in Vermont. We're one of the lowest ones. We dip below the 3. So that's actually good and bad. Because what it tells you is that if we have an unemployment rate, there's a couple things in there, is underemployment. So it may be that you may have a job, but what are those jobs paying? And I think we saw a lot of that before. But we also have a situation that if we have underemployment here from an economic development perspective in terms of businesses, we want businesses to grow here. So that means that they have to entice people to bring in people from outside the area to come in here as an employee. And if they can't find housing, what are they going to do? So we have traditionally with the Upper Valley Housing Coalition had a very, very strong presence of businesses because they know that that is a critical factor for them. One of the other things that this tells you a little bit about is just keep in mind that when we have these unemployment rates, there are certain numbers of the population that have just stopped looking for work, so they tend not to be reported in here, so the numbers are probably a little bit higher than what you see here. And again, here is another look at it from the non-farm payroll employment. The other has a combination of it. And again, it just gives you a little snapshot of where we are and where we have been. So this is a really tough one to see. I'm sorry about that. But this particular thing, what it's telling us here is that what are the, this is a little bit old. I was trying to put together some of the data myself. It's a little bit more challenging given the information that's out on the internet right now, but or going to the state websites. But what this is telling you is that the top one is 5.2%, and that's really telling you that separating, filtering, clarifying, precipitation, still machine setters, operators, and tenders. Those tend to be some of the growing occupations in Vermont. It's part of your manufacturing field. So we are seeing a little bit of a growth there. It's part of your development, people, construction. You'll see that in there too. That's the highest, and this was done in 2014. So I suspect there may be a little bit of changes, but I think what's interesting to note is that all of the other things under there are growing at about a kind of an even pace. You know, between, there's this huge number there of 5.2%, and then everything below that is 2.9 to 1.9. So there is a slow growth in other industries. So that's really just the takeaway I want you to have on this, more so than a particular prediction of where we're going by the year 2024. And we'll dig into that more once, you know, we start doing more in-depth economic development stuff. Regional creative economy is one of those things that we know is on the rise. And particularly in Hartford, we've seen that over and over again with what's happening in White River and with all of the creative economy. But, so these are just kind of a little bit of a snippet. Thank you from Two Rivers, Chris, getting this to me today. We do have a regionalized creative economy initiative going on, and based on that, you can see that we're doing pretty well in our Upper Valley area or our region as compared to really other parts of the state. So again, it's one of those things when we're thinking into the future, what is our future and how can we do that, keep that in mind. So one of the other things I really want to talk a little bit about is really building strong villages, centers, and a new economy. And this is sort of launching us into the next level of conversation that we're going to be having in our breakout sessions. And that's really, what is it that we need to do as planners, as developers? And that's including all of you that's sitting here in the room, because I consider you part of our planning group, because you're here and you're getting engaged. We need to understand a little bit more about what drives a vibrant community as we're connecting less and less with bricks and mortar buildings for work and for commerce. It's changing. We can see it right in front of us. What we thought was going to be possible even 5 years ago in terms of technology, where people work, the fact that they connect across the world and they don't even have to leave their bedroom. You know, it's a great opportunities, but it's also shifting the dynamic of what makes a vibrant community. So some of the questions I would like you to begin to think about as we're going to go into the brainstorming session with Rebecca. And again, this is the interplay between economic development and housing. It's all together. What are our communities going to look like? As we become more adept at doing our business and shopping and playing via the internet, what is next for the developing the strong, viable communities? Go out there, think broadly. Should the focus be on creating places where people want to live, since being close to where you work no longer needs to be the driving force? Do you need to be close to your job? Do you even need to be close to the grocery store? Certainly retail you don't need. We've seen that over and over again where a lot of the retail is shifting into the internet. So things like specialty shops, things like opportunities for people to engage in having a sense of community may start to take more precedent in terms of what drives the local economy. What are the implications for our land use and planning and development? I think last week we really dug into that. We started to think more creatively about what our village centers could look like, because they don't need to look like the traditional ones that we've done. It may shake up the whole concept of land use for us that we need to start to dig into. And then should the focus be on creating the vibrant, sustainable cities, downtowns and villages based on where people want to live and the lifestyle amenities that go along with that? So these are the trends we want to start pushing into, start exploring in the next part of our session here as we start to plan for tomorrow and the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. So I'm there. I'll kick it off to you, Rebecca.
Okay, great. Ton of information just tossed your way, so it's completely fine if you didn't digest all of that at once. We'll take a few minutes actually and just do questions and answers if people want to go back to something or clarify or get info, and then we'll dig into this a little bit further. So any questions for Lori on what you just heard?
Still something.
Yeah.
Not a question, but it is a comment.
Yeah.
Recently it was announced that income inequality in the United States is at the worst position it has been since the golden era of the 1890s. Fortunately, Vermont happens to rank among the lowest in that particular statistic across the United States. But still, growing inequality of income and wealth, which is associated with income, is a major issue which is going to continue to affect all of this. As the wealth and control of the economy gets increasingly concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, more and more of us are going to be left behind.
Right, and I can reiterate that because when I was looking at the median incomes across the state and how that compares in terms of wages, one of the things that was very clear to me is that 50% of the people don't make enough money to have the standard of living to afford even, modest housing. That's a sobering, very sobering statistic. Now, fortunately, still, we have some opportunities in front of us, but yeah.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but the one that's sticking in my craw here is that when you mention people over 65, and I'm in that category, I own a house. So I just wonder about it isn't that people at 65 are going to move in. If they are, they're going to move to Queechy Lakes or someplace and have all those amenities. But you're not talking, that statistic kind of, why would a 65, 80-year-old move to want to buy a house versus maybe, I just didn't understand all the statistics.
Well, the statistics really look at rental population. And the home ownership is something that, I didn't get into as much in this, but I think what I was trying to do was actually look at it in terms of people's incomes and what's available out there. A mortgage of $925 or a house certainly would be higher than that. People don't necessarily buy houses in their older years. They're really downsizing, and a lot of people will sell their home and then go into a rental situation.
Rental situation
Yes.
versus,
Yes.
but then they have the money from the sale of the,
It depends on what the equity is in their home, yes.
well,
I saw a hand here, and then we'll go to Robin and back.
Yeah, define creative economy.
So, you want to take?
I could, or we could have Chris jump in.
Well,
I mean-
Chris, stand up and why don't you? That's right. Let our expert talk about it.
I wish I had a bigger slide, but I can kind of show this. So there's kind of 7 different areas that are part of the creative economy. So it's kind of looking at performing arts like Northern Sage, looking at the visual arts and fine arts, film and media, culture heritage, and then it also includes like artisanal food production is included in that kind of definition of the broader creative economy.
And the idea behind that is that people begin to recognize that there's value in it. That's an amenity almost. That's always thought about as an amenity, an amenity. But what the creative economy is really saying, no, this isn't just something nice for you to do in your social time. It is a driving force in what people are doing to earn a living in our communities. And it's been out there as just sort of the arts or, the arsenal breads or all of those things. But more and more we're seeing that come to the forefront, and it's making up a more significant part of people's wages. So,
Robin?
So you have this problem which you very well defined, which is that we have a burgeoning, let's use White River Junction region, and we have businesses there. I've talked to 12 business owners in the last 2 weeks who cannot find workers because there's no place for them to live, which is what you were talking about. So the point is, how do you make a developer or encourage a developer to want to build low-income housing? Because it's a moot point if you don't address the housing. You can't expect them to come. All right, for instance, unfortunately, I was able for 1 month of my life this winter, in the worst part of the winter, to interview so many nurses and so many assistant physicians every single day, day shift and night shift. And I said, where do you live? What was it like coming, this is Dartmouth Hitchcock, which this area also, is a housing area for them. Not a single solitary one of the over 100 medical aides, these are registered nurses, lives anywhere near the Upper Valley. They're driving at least an hour and an hour back. Now, if they're going north, they're going over the Green Mountains. If they're going south, they're going over the White Mountains. And we all know what that's like in the middle of the winter, and yet they show up in time. And I talk to them a lot about this. So the answer for the excitement that's happening in our region is we have to create low-income housing, but we can't do it. We have to figure out a way, and maybe all of you, can brainstorm this. How do we get the people who are going to buy the property to make low-income housing and not say something else that's not helping this situation?
So I think you're pointing to the very questions that we're going to need to dig into in our breakout sessions. We're not going to come up with all of the answers today, but we will begin to ask the critical questions like that and start to peel away the onion a little bit. And we've got work ahead of us,
Let's go here and
Actually, we did great work.
okay.
Just a quick question. Do you have that stat that 7 in 10 of new jobs will be lower than the rental wage? And then you put up a thing about the growth of the creative economy jobs. Is there any correlation? Are 7 in 10 new creative economy jobs going to be lower than the rental wage, or do we have any sense of what kind of wages those jobs pay?
Do you have anything on that, Chris?
No, I don't.
We don't have any
No.
statistics on that. I mean, I don't think we have, and again, those are the kinds of things we're going to dig down into a little bit more when we get into a breakout session with the experts there, and I can see a few people here that also can offer some information during that time. But that's another thing. What we need more information in order to help us know where to go.
So the important point about this statistic, about 30% of Vermonters will be 65 or older by the year 2030, is that many of the people who we are talking about currently are not able to make enough money to cover their living needs, as was just discussed. If you are in that position, you are not putting money aside for retirement. Your sole money in retirement, to the extent you're going to have anything, is going to be Social Security, and we know that Social Security is not something that you can live on. That means that we as a state, because we currently have such high prices for housing, are in the future going to have a population which is facing homelessness. And that population is also going to be facing increasing medical needs and all the other issues associated with the elderly. So we know, because of how things are now, we're stacking the deck against ourselves in the coming years.
One kind of ugly little truth we like to hide under a rock, and I see this is called an Upper Valley landlord.
I can't hear you, and I'd like to.
Oh, what I said is kind of one little ugly little truth that we like to hide. And I see this as both an employer and a landlord in the Upper Valley, is both mental health and substance abuse, specifically the opioid crisis. And a lot of that has just crushed the local workforce and some of the housing stock. I can tell you, there's nothing more painful as a landlord than evicting someone, and there's nothing more painful than evicting someone with a mental health or substance issue. But it's a very nasty reality that we face.
Okay, great.
Take a second.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I've noticed, having lived here now for 22 years, is that I have not seen any new neighborhoods of, I don't know, prefabbed or, trailer homes, frankly, go up. I know we've got some that are, south on 5, and we've got the neighborhood in White River Junction, and we've got a couple of neighborhoods out along River Road. And I'm pretty aware of them, and I've, walked around and knocked on doors when I was running for the select board. So, but we haven't had anything like that in the 20 years that I've come here. Now, I would say that maybe the modern equivalent of it is like some of the stuff that Vermont is doing, the smaller places, zero energy and all that. But are we throwing up unnecessary barriers in our zoning regulations that would prevent more housing of that sort coming online?
So those are, again, things that we have to look at, but I can say that one of the things we don't have is people are not taking advantage of the density that we already have built into some of our districts. So, but that's not to say that we have to look at that. That's always one of the pieces of the formula, is not to presume that it's all okay. That if people come up with ideas of what we want to do, then we have to go back and say, how does that get implemented? And if that means we have to do changes in our zoning regulations or our subdivision regulations in order to meet those goals and objectives, then those are things that we put on the table for discussion.
Any last questions? Let's do one more.
Do we have any data on, partly to FX's point, do we have any data on the energy impact? I mean, all of the numbers that were shown here appear to be focused purely on rent, which is oftentimes, if you're renting a 2-bedroom facility for $1,000 a month, in the winter months, depending on the efficiency of the building, you might be spending $500 or more a month on heating fuel. And I know that it's a regular occurrence in a homeownership situation where the energy costs of a home are much greater than the tax liability of a home. And yet none of this is required by law to be listed on real estate listings and so forth. So if we're going to talk about affordable housing, I'm pretty sure we have to talk about energy as well.
Right, and if you go to the housing section, that is one of the things on the list of looking at tiny homes, energy efficiency, what size homes do we really need to have to meet our needs, and those are some of the things that we will dig into in the housing breakout group as well. Good point. So, yeah.
Okay. So before we break out into groups, I just want to do a little additional brainstorming. We have almost a full chart of what we know. There's actually one more that I want to throw out here. Some of the national trends that we're seeing in preferences, I think, are a little bit more optimistic than some of the stats we're seeing here. So we know, for example, that millennials want to live in dense, compact, vibrant village centers. They do not want big mansions. They do not want acres of lawn to mow. They don't want to live out in suburbia. They are excited about those downtowns that almost feel urban, where they can live and walk downstairs and find a bar, find a coffee shop,
Find a job.
find a job. Yes. And we're also seeing similar trends among seniors. So seniors want to age in place. They want to be able to walk places. They do not want to be stuck out in nowhere as they become less able to drive as winters get harder and harder. So we're seeing a lot of demand for things that really can help the community across the board. Yeah.
I would add that what you don't know is what will millennials want when they're 50.
Great.
That's a good question. That's right. Because what we want when we were 20 compared to what we want when we were 60 or 50 or whatever.
Preference for density doesn't mean that we can afford density.
Right.
Okay, so what else?
I was going to add another, what we don't know, I think, again, to kind of an earlier point about how far people are traveling to get to their jobs. You know, how affordable housing, you kind of have to think about transportation as well, right? If you're talking about, can I afford to live here?
Yeah.
You got to look at the cost of the dwelling as well as the cost of the energy and the cost of getting to where you get your money to pay for all that.
Yeah. So what's the don't know?
What's the impact on the transportation availability in Hartford? When, I guess, around Hartford. Maybe it's not a we, maybe it's an I don't know.
Okay, others, what do we not know?
Banking, finance. Availability of loans to build houses, buy houses, etc. There's a direct correlation between what happens in the housing market, the economy, largely because any housing is so expensive. You grow it. If you don't have money that's available, you can't have growth. And we have been putting literally trillions of dollars into the bond market that has made borrowing money unreasonably low, well below long-term historic rates until of late, and starting to change. And if those rates go up, it's going to be harder and harder to bring together plans for projects.
What I don't know, and maybe there is numbers out there, is where is this available land to develop all these and develop properties? As I look around White River, I really don't know where we're building all these.
We have maps that delineate that.
Is that?
Well, planning and zoning
Okay.
has maps which you might want to take a look at. And usually in master plan there are maps that show you different zoning areas where development can happen, and density, and then mixed use and things like that.
Maybe to add to that is affordability on that too, because the land may be available, but the developers don't want to develop it.
Sure. And I think the thing I would add is last week the groups again were thinking really creatively about land use. So not necessarily assuming that what's identified as developable land today is it for Hartford. You can get creative and figure out where you should have. Yeah.
In our presentation, Lori mentioned that we want our businesses to grow, continue to grow. What I don't know is at what rate, and do we want them to grow indefinitely? Can they grow indefinitely in a sustainable fashion? Can they grow, is their growth predicated on resource extraction, and is that sustainable over what long-term period?
Climate change.
We don't know how climate change is going to affect what we have now and what we're planning.
And more important, the other point is we don't know what it's going to do to everybody else. There are some really serious projections that say this will be one of the few areas in the country where relatively pleasant climate and weather conditions may survive. Elsewhere, they could be a whole lot worse and hotter, more, so forth. So
Our city's underwater, where do you come from?
that fortunately is a ways away, but
Boston.
city being flooded regularly, not too far away.
Boston was underwater.
Right, so an issue, what happens here, and are we going to be dealing with climate refugees? There are a couple other hands, I think. Austin is there, no.
The sort of 800-pound elephant in the room in terms of planning is our parking problem. We have a very serious problem with parking. And so what Alan was saying about transportation and parking are symbiotic sometimes, but we don't know. Land is owned privately. it's not an awful lot of town-owned land that can accommodate that. But it's just one more thing that growing businesses, affordable housing, energy and transportation, we still need.
Okay.
And we don't know how we're gonna get it.
Interestingly, that can go both ways.
What do you mean?
If you have a sharing economy, self-driving cars, you don't need to actually own a car because a car can show up at your door anytime you ask for one to come by. And you just subscribe to a car, so you don't have as much need for parking. So it could theoretically go different
In
ways.
that case, we need to revise the transit and the roads in White River Junction.
I think that's a big
They
one for
will not
any of you.
accommodate that.
Any of you who are at the energy forum may be thinking the same thing. If those trends go in some of the ways we're predicting or trying to make them move, our parking problem may not be what we think it is today. One last one here.
We, I think, operate on the assumption that the nuclear family is going to be the sort of housing unit, so to speak, or the family unit. But we don't actually know that that's going to be, that the nuclear family is going to be sort of the family unit of the future. So perhaps our housing stock will need to accommodate larger groups or smaller groups or, I don't know.
Or both.
Yeah.
That's a very good idea.
Okay, so how well? So I think you have a lot to keep in mind as you break out into some groups to really discuss this in depth. I'm going to give you just a couple of other points of guidance before we break out. So in the 4 forums we've held so far, we've heard probably hundreds of different ideas for what should happen in Hartford and how you should get there. But there are really 4 key themes that have emerged. They emerged pretty early on and we've been hearing them repeatedly. So as you are discussing where Hartford needs to go and how you get there, please keep in mind the following. Especially as Lori has emphasized today, it needs to be affordable for everybody. So whatever solutions we come up with have to keep in mind the 50% of people who cannot afford housing and the people who are struggling. It has to be high quality. So it has to be good quality today, it has to be housing that's going to last, economy that's going to last and be durable, that will attract people. It does have to be sustainable, so it has to be something that's not just going to be a short-term fix or solution, but it has to be planning strategies that will last, even given what we don't know. Has to be accessible. So we've heard a lot about this, and that means affordable, but it also means, you have to be able to get there. People have to be able to access it. They have to feel comfortable and welcome. And inclusive is part of that as well. So we've heard a lot that people value Hartford being a diverse place. They want to see it be even more diverse and inclusive, and that's something to keep in mind with all of these strategies. Yeah,
I just wanted to comment on your comment of what I think you're talking about. It actually has a name, and they're called intentional communities.
that may be part of it. I think what Becky's talking about is a little bit broader. That's maybe one type of community that we can find.
Well,
So-
it would be good if we don't know if that will, we're allowed to do that.
Okay. Yeah, the group's talking about housing. They want to talk about intentional communities or others. So we're going to split up. We'll have 2 groups stay in this room. The group that wants to talk about housing specifically, and the group that wants to talk about village centers. The other 2 are going to talk about jobs and workforce development and about the new economy, big picture. What is this new economy going to look like? How do we advance small businesses and entrepreneurship, which we think will be big. So I'm going to let you all self-select, pick which topic is most interesting. We will only do 1 topic tonight, but at the end, you will get a chance to roam around and take a look at all the different posters and see what everyone thinks of what. So, quick in?
Just one question. Is this exercise going on with Hartford in isolation from the other towns that are within our immediate region?
Lori, I'll let you respond to that one.
No,
Yes and no. I mean, we do want to focus on what's going on here, but we've actually had other people coming from other communities throughout this process that are either live in other communities or have an interest in a particular topic. That was very clearly demonstrated in our energy forum. So, but part of this is just to sort of get a temperature from the people that are living and working or own businesses or whatever in the community. And adjacent community members have always been available, you know, it's been open to them. But once we start digging in a little bit more, and this is something to explain to people, this is the beginning of the exploration of these topics and these issues. What we want to do is start to lay out a path going forward. This is not the be-all and end-all, but it's really raising to the surface a lot of awareness and questions and opportunities and so forth that over the next several years, I expect we'll be continuing to work on all of these. So, and that will certainly be a very engaging process with all of our, a lot of what we do, as you can see with the creative economy, is a regionalized situation. Working with Twin Pines, we have a very big understanding of where we sit within the context of the Upper Valley or a region. So a lot of what we do, and then one of the reasons also why I didn't focus a lot on Hartford statistics, although, you know, because the state and the Windsor County give us a good flavor of what's going on, and it shows the trends. We're not that outside of those trends. We're a part of those trends. So.
Okay, so let's split up. If you are going to the other room, you might need to bring a chair with you. If you're here, you might need to move a chair to the right spot. So why don't we put housing up here at the front in this room, village centers in the back. And if you want to go next door, feel free to move. Just for a minute, be out of here quickly. So I just want to take a few minutes to wrap up with the whole group, and then we will adjourn. You can go out and have snacks and mingle and chat with neighbors and go take a look at what all the other groups talked about. So when you go out, you can see what ideas really came out of the discussion. It may be a little bit hard to tell from the posters, so we're asking some of the facilitators and experts to stay and tell you a little bit more about those ideas. And we're going to give you all some sticky dots as well. So as you're walking around, you can vote on which ideas you think are most promising. The colors don't mean anything, they're all the same. You can use them all on one thing if you're really sold on one particular idea, or feel free to spread them around as you like. This is completely unscientific. It's not going to really matter for anything. It's not a vote. But it's going to just give a little bit of a snapshot as to where you all in this room think Hartford should be focusing its energy. So I will just take a couple minutes and ask you all in your groups, what ideas excited you the most tonight? And just give us a quick headline, about 10 words or less, rather than diving in. So, anyone have something that you're walking away pretty excited about? I think it's a really good strategy.
I'll start. I think one of our best strategies came up at the end was to partner with Tuck and Thayer and stuff, because we could be using them to do studies.
Great. Yep, so much of what you all talked about, I think, hinges on having more and better information. So, yeah. Who else?
Good aha moments.
I'm going to have to pick on group leaders.
We were in the village
Yep.
group, and there are some of us in that group that are trying to figure out how we can revitalize Hartford Village.
Yeah.
You know, because of the beautiful historic houses. And so if anybody has a grand idea, my husband did several years ago when he tried to get Iliad to buy it to bring their facility here, but that wasn't going to happen for lots of reasons. But so if you had, you know, that's just what was one idea. But Hartford that's a beautiful little village, and it just, you know.
So that Iliad to buy what?
The Elks building. That was years ago, but I mean, if it had
No, I just want to know the building you were talking about, yes.
Yeah, so the Elks building at the Historical Society is trying to build.
I'm the president of the Historical Society.
It's just one of many.
So if I could just jump in as a kind of one of the people in the group as the expert, but what we saw was that there's a unique character and identity for each of the villages, and that actually this is something we talked about several years ago when we did our village center projects, but it's really capitalizing on that and building on that so that West Hartford could be the place where you go for trails. You've got your cultural center in the big way down in White River Junction. You can go over to to Hartford Village and really begin to experience history, and really starting to promote and capitalize on the character and the uniqueness of each one of these as a way to connect them. And so that we can get everyone within the community to go, oh, I'm going to go and do this special event. We're going to do a 5K run in West Hartford, and we have it at the same time every year. That kind of thing. And it just really branding and pulling back. And then that can help stimulate a general store that may be needed in West Hartford, as an example, because now there'll be a population coming there that would be interested in doing that. And so those kinds of things.
Okay, let's just pick on the other groups really quickly. So Jeff and Andrew, what came out of your group?
Well,
What was the group?
we were housing. Lots of barriers, lots of challenges. So the planning department's going to have a lot of work to overcome those challenges. That's exciting. But the other thing was, I think, adaptive reuse. So just reusing the either existing housing stock or existing buildings. And also focusing on energy efficiency throughout all those categories.
Excellent. And Angie and Bob, we didn't hear from your group.
Go, Bob.
We talked about supporting career and technical education to try to stimulate more connections with technical center and community college and VTC. There's a growing evolution of interconnections with on the state level with Department of Labor, Department of Education, Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So we're trying to promote that. We talked about maybe some housing solutions that were tailored to support retiring people, elderly people who would like to maybe live in a place with 2 or 3 or 4 other couples or single folks in places that can identify with the cultural and medical and other things that make Hartford a really nice town to be connected with.
Great. Sounds like really diverse conversations happening and lots of crossover between the groups too, which is great. So before we break, let me just pass this to Lori to tell you a little bit about what's happening next in the process.
Okay, so what we're doing is we have a lot of work to do just to take everything that we've heard over the last 6 weeks with our 5 community meetings and start to synthesize and understand that. One thing that is kicking off this week is Jeff has 2 working groups related to energy, and that's a direct follow-up to the energy workshop that we had on the 25th. And he still has openings. Jeff, do you want to just, when are they and which ones are?
Sure. Renewable energy generation, that's tomorrow.
Renewable energy
from
tomorrow.
4 to 5:30.
4 to 5:30 here.
Yep, Town Hall, room 312. And then building integrity, that's on Thursday from 2 to 3:30.
So that's building integrity on Thursday at 2 to 3:30 here
Also
in this
here
building
at
as well.
312.
So, and we are trying to do similar things with other sections that we've had. Our goal is within the next week or 2 to get some of these things up that we've done at each of the meetings, asking questions and the opportunities for other people to just go to our Facebook and give us input. If they weren't able to come to the meeting or they were at a meeting and they had some more thoughts, just to get that out there. And over the course of the rest of the summer, we'll be synthesizing this information. We'll be continuing to work with our steering committee. And then in the fall, we're really going to be hard at writing and rewriting our sections. So that when it comes to probably the end of November or so, we're hoping in November to be able to get a first cut draft. It may not happen until December. Where's Matt? There he is. We got a lot of work to do. And again, we'll be working with our steering committee to get that out. That would be in our first level of a review of the draft. Community meeting, there'll be at least 1 more community meeting and maybe a couple more than that, with the Planning Commission taking the lead on that again. And then we'll wrap up our draft into a more final draft and start the formal adoption process come January, January, February of next year, with the goal of getting it to the select board and approved by mid-May. So.
Great, so with that, I just thank you all again for coming out and giving us this much of your time, and invite you to stay a little longer, so go have some food, chat, introduce yourself to someone you don't know. Eric, yeah.
And thank you for shepherding us through this.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure working with you all. So please do take a look at what's on the other posters and have some conversations, and pick up a slip of sticky dots so that your vote that really doesn't matter will not be lost.
It does, it gives us an idea as to where we're giving us
To make the community a little more exciting, interactive too, so if you want to hand out